Hi, my name is Margie Memmott. I work for Utah State University Extension Service in Juab County. And today we're going to be making a perfectly mitered corner blanket. And I'm going to show you the tools that you need to do this. You need 2 pieces of contrasting fabric. You need a cutting board, a cutting ruler, and a rotary cutter. And make sure that you be very careful with that because it is very, very sharp. You need a pair of scissors. You need a marking pen. You also need a seam gauge to measure, and you need your pins and a point turner. We're going to make a baby blanket that ends up being about 1 yard square. And in order to get that, we're going to cut the back piece of fabric 42 inches square and the front piece of fabric 32 inches square. So there's a 10-inch difference. And the first thing we're going to do to get that square, we want to make sure that we cut the selvage edge off. And if you'll notice this selvage edge, it's different color, it's got a print in it, it's got little holes in it, and we want to make sure that that does not go in the design of our blanket. So we want to make sure to trim that all off. So the back is going to be 42 inches square, and I'm going to do the same thing with the front so that it makes the front piece 32 inches square. So I have my 2 pieces of fabric already cut in squares. Now I need to find the center of each side. So I'm going to fold each side in half and mark it with a pin. And I've done that on both of these pieces of fabric. So I have a pin marking the center of the back and the front. I need the lengthwise grain and the crosswise grain to match up so that my blanket, when I'm sewing it, will sew together smoothly and evenly and I won't get any puckers. And in order to determine which is the lengthwise grain, I am going to pull on the fabric, and the lengthwise grain has almost no give. Crosswise grain, on the other hand, when I pull on it, it has quite a bit of stretch. So I'm checking that. And this fabric piece is also stretching quite a bit here. So the crosswise grains are matched up and the lengthwise grains are matched up. So I'm going to go back to my centers, lay the blanket out flat, use my seam gauge to measure the distance of the back piece and make sure that it is exactly the same on this side as it is on the opposite side. And if it's not, then in order to make them exactly the same, then I would come back to the center and I would shift my top piece to be exactly the same. And in this instance, I'm trying to get to the 5 inches because there's a difference of 10 inches. So 5 on this side and 5 on the other side. So there we go. That's perfectly set so that we can continue. I'm going to mark my stop points. So now I'm going to take my seam gauge and I'm going to measure in 1/4 inch from the edge of the smaller piece of fabric, and then I'm going to go around the corner and I'm going to measure in 1/4 inch and I'm going to make a mark with my pen. And that is called my stop point. And this is where I'm going to start sewing and where I'm going to stop sewing. And I'm going to use my pin right into the mark, and I'm going to do the mark, make the mark and pin it at the other end. Okay, now once you get both ends pinned at the stop point and pin it in the center, then I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch seam all the way down this edge from the stop point that I began with to the ending stop point. I want to make sure to back stitch at each end, and I sew 2 but not through the stop points. Okay, so I've changed blankets. This blanket I have actually sewn the first 2 sides. And one thing that I wanted to tell you is as you're sewing the blanket together, remember to leave an opening about a hand span so that you can turn the blanket right side out after you have sewn all 4 sides. So now with my first 2 sides sewn, I'm ready to sew the 3rd and 4th side of the blanket. So I'm going to do pretty much the same thing that I did on the first 2 sides, but it gets a little tricky because the fabric doesn't feel, it's moving very easily because we've sewn those first 2 sides. But we're going to use the same principles. We go back to the center, we match up the pins which mark the center, we bring the edge of the top fabric down to the edge of the bottom fabric and work that all smooth, laying flat all the way down the end of the blanket. And I'm going to shift this so that you can see this particular side. Now I'm going to measure and make sure again that the back piece of fabric has the same amount showing on this end as it does on the opposite end. And I will measure both ends, and then I'm going to shift my top fabric to make sure that it is exactly in the center. And I'll measure that one more time from the edge of the back piece to the edge of the front piece. And when I get that so that it's exactly the same as the other side, then I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take a pin and I'm going to mark it, pin it right in that stop point. So we'll do this pinning on this side and the other end, and then we will sew from the stop point to the other stop point, 1/4 inch seam, and then do the same thing for the 4th side. Now that we have both ends pinned on the 3rd side, we're going to start sewing at the stop point, go all the way down to the other end, and stop at the stop point here, making sure to backstitch and sew to but not through the stop points. And we're going to do the very same thing on the 4th side. And at that point your blanket will be all sewn on all 4 sides. Then we'll be ready for the next step. Okay, so here we have another blanket that I'm working on, and it's got all 4 sides sewn. And it ends up that I've got this floppy edge on every corner. And at this point in time, we're going to make our mitered corner. So I'm going to pinch it right here where the front piece ends. So in other words, I've got the stop point right in my fingers. And I'm going to shake and adjust the blanket so that the outside or the back piece wraps around the front piece and the seams match up exactly. And then I'll shake the blanket. I'm going to hold it tight and I'm going to shake the blanket and lay it flat on the table. And then I'll show you how to make the mitered corner. So we're laying this out flat, making sure that the seam edges match up exactly. And I'm using the grid of the cutting board underneath to be a help and a guide for me. So here's the stop point, and I have my seam coming to but not through the stop point. And now I have to draw my line and make my mark to sew the mitered corner. So what I'm going to do is take a ruler or anything with a right angle, and I'm going to use the folded edge as my guide for my right angle. And I'll line up the ruler to the edge of the fold, and then I'm going to draw a line where the stop point is at the edge of the fabric. You can use a piece of paper, anything with a right angle. So I could even take a piece of paper and I could match that up. You don't have to have an expensive ruler. And I'm going to take my pen and I'm going to mark that line. and I'm going to sew that from the fold, back stitching, coming down, and I'm sewing to but not through the stop point. And I do that on all 4 sides. And before we go on, I want to just show you that if you by accident use your right angle and line it up to the seam edge and match it to the stop point and draw your line here, then sew your seam and then cut your little tail off, you will have taken out a chunk of fabric that you needed for your mitered blanket. So make sure you don't make that mistake. Make sure that you use the fold as the guide for your right angle coming down to the stop point. Now that I've sewn the mitered corner seam and I've clipped my threads, I've done this on all 4 corners. Now it's time to trim this little floppy piece. And if I sewed a 1/4 inch seam, then I'm going to trim a 1/4 inch. Now I'm going to take the blanket from the corners and I'm going to shake it out. So I'll turn it this way so you can see what I'm doing. So I've taken the blanket by 2 corners and I'm shaking it out so that it hangs really nice. And then I would lay it flat. And at this point, I would take it to the ironing board and I will press the seams to the outside, towards the outside edge, all the way around. So we'll take that to the iron and press those seams out, and then we would, using the opening that we have left, we will turn the blanket right side out. Okay. So now I have my blanket turned right side out, and here is my hole that I'm going to actually utilize my point turner to get those perfect points. So I'll show you how I do that. So I take my point turner and I go in through the hole and I push with that point and I get that perfect point and end up having that great mitered corner. And it's going to look awesome once we get it all pressed. So I have the points turned on this. I've taken it to the iron, and as you can see, this is another blanket. It's almost finished. One more step. So I'm going to show you how to do that. We've got the opening here. We've pressed it. We need to secure the opening shut with our pins. Now we're ready to take it to the sewing machine, and we are going to do a final top stitch just inside the inside edge of the binding back piece of the blanket all the way around the end, and when you get that done, you will have a finished product. Your blanket will be all done. So here is an example of some of the blankets that you can do, and these are all flannel, but you can use different types of fabric according to the season. We have some broadcloth right here for the summery look. We actually even have some minky here for winter. And some finishing touches you can do are rickrack right on that seam where the back joins the front, or you can apply the rickrack right inside as you're sewing the seams together. And another thing I wanted to show you is you can make your border be smaller or larger. So have fun with your mitered corner blanket.